The metal cup trembled in Hiroshi Tanaka's weathered hands as he lifted it to his lips. Inside was something he had never tasted before, an ice-cold Coca-Cola. The sweet, fizzy liquid hit his dry throat like lightning. Around him, fellow Japanese prisoners of war stared in disbelief as American guards passed out hamburgers wrapped in paper, French fries served in cardboard cartons, and bottles of soda that sparkled in the Nevada sun like liquid amber. It was August 1945. For men who had spent years believing they would die for the emperor, this moment was more shocking than their military defeat. They weren't just tasting food. They were tasting an entirely different world. Tanaka, once a sergeant in the Imperial Japanese Navy, had braced himself for torture or death when he was captured in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Instead, he now found himself at a picnic table in Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, watching American soldiers toss half-eaten sandwiches into trash bins. While he and his fellow captives ate better than many civilians back home in Japan, the cultural shock was so profound that some prisoners refused to eat it first, convinced this was either poison or a trick. But this wasn't psychological warfare. This was America, where abundance was so common it seemed almost careless. Two worlds collide. This story isn't just about hamburgers and Coca-Cola. It's about two civilizations colliding. One was built on scarcity, honor, and sacrifice. The other was built on abundance, efficiency, and mass production. For Japanese soldiers, capture was never supposed to happen. The Bushido Code taught that surrender meant dishonor, not just for the soldier, but for his entire family. Many chose suicide rather than captivity. It was drilled into them that Americans were soft, weak, and incapable of true sacrifice. Across the Pacific, the United States was mobilizing on a scale history had never seen. Factories that once made cars now churned out tanks and planes. Assembly lines that produced radios and toasters were retooled for rifles and rations. And perhaps most surprisingly, America transformed the way it fed its armies and its prisoners. Japanese soldiers often survived on rice balls, dried fish, or whatever they could forage. They fought with hunger gnawing at their stomachs and improvised equipment in their hands. By contrast, American troops carried chocolate bars, cigarettes, and instant coffee in their K-rations. Their supply chains didn't just deliver bullets and bombs. They delivered Coca-Cola, canned meat, and chewing gum. First encounters. The first major wave of Japanese prisoners arrived after the Guadalcanal campaign in 1942-43. These weren't broken men. Many were elite Marines, aviators, and paratroopers who had helped win Japan's early victories. They expected cruelty. What they found was something entirely different. Sergeant Yukio Matsumoto, captured on Saipan, recalled his shock at the medical care he received: bandages sealed in packages, bottles of medicine with printed labels, gleaming instruments. In Japan, even military hospitals were running out of basics. Here, supplies seemed endless. But the food was what truly stunned them. Processed cheese, canned meat, impossibly soft white bread. And above all, Coca-Cola. For Americans, it was just a drink, a taste of home. For Japanese prisoners, it was nearly incomprehensible, a beverage with no nutritional value, consumed purely for pleasure, yet produced in massive quantities even during war. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Hayashi, captured in the Marshall Islands, described his first prison meal: hamburgers, French fries, and Coca-Cola. To him, it was like a meal from another planet. The hamburger represented industrial efficiency in food form: ground beef, processed cheese, mass-produced buns. The fries, cut perfectly and fried in abundant oil, seemed luxurious. And Coca-Cola embodied something even greater: a global network of production and distribution that Japan couldn't begin to match. At first, many prisoners resisted. They suspected poison or feared dishonor. But hunger won. Slowly, they began to eat. The flavors were overwhelming: greasy, salty, sweet, bold. Japanese food prized subtlety. This was food built for power and speed. And beneath the shock of taste came an even deeper realization. This was the power of a nation that could afford to feed its prisoners better than Japan could feed its citizens. Lessons in abundance. Camp Shelby in Mississippi, Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, Camp Livingston in Louisiana. American prison camps ran like small cities. Standardized barracks, mess halls serving thousands, even sports fields, and movie theaters. Trucks arrived daily with fresh food, medical supplies, and even luxuries like books and ice cream. In Japan, prison camps were harsh and improvised. Supplies were short, and surrender was despised. America, on the other hand, had industrialized captivity itself. For Japanese prisoners, the waste was most shocking. Guards tossed away half-eaten sandwiches, poured out coffee, and threw damaged goods in the trash. For men from a culture where every grain of rice was precious, this seemed unthinkable. Some even collected discarded items, bottles, scraps of wood, paper napkins, treating American trash as treasure. And yet, something else happened in these camps: human connection. Young American guards, many from small towns, were fascinated by their Japanese captives. At first, they saw them as fanatics. But over shared meals, that perception softened. As Corporal James Mitchell of Iowa wrote later, watching them react to simple things like ice cream or a candy bar, you realized they were just soldiers like us. The only difference was, they had fought with nothing while we had everything. A different kind of power. By 1945, what once seemed impossible had become routine. Japanese soldiers who once guarded every grain of rice were now scooping ice cream for each other in camp kitchens. Men who thought surrender was worse than death now drank Coca-Cola under the Louisiana sun. Captain Ichiro Sato experienced his turning point when a bright red Coca-Cola truck rolled into Camp Livingston. The driver casually unloaded cases of bottles, explaining that millions were produced every day, not just for soldiers, but for ordinary people across America. Sato was stunned. In Japan, a single orange was a luxury. In America, liquid refreshment was manufactured by the millions. Lieutenant Masao Fujiwara, a naval aviator working in a camp kitchen, was equally amazed. Every day, he handled deliveries of meat, vegetables, and dairy in quantities that could have fed his entire squadron for weeks. At first, he thought Americans were weak because they loved comfort. But in that kitchen, he realized their comfort was actually a new kind of strength, born of productivity, efficiency, and abundance. The realization. As reports of American bombing raids filtered into the camps, prisoners began to connect the dots. The same factories that produced Coca-Cola bottles by the millions were also producing tanks, planes, and warships. The same supply chains that kept prison kitchens stocked with beef and bread also kept armies fighting across continents. Private Kenji Nakamura summed it up best. We had been told Americans were weak because they loved comfort more than honor. But when I saw how much they could produce, how easily they created abundance, even in prison camps, I realized we had been fighting a war we could never win. For these men, hamburgers and Coca-Cola weren't just food. They were symbols of a power far greater than military might, the power of an industrial society that could turn abundance itself into a weapon.